This year's African Union Summit opened in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa last week at the body's headquarters, but the main two-day event kicked off on Sunday, February 9, with heads of state coming in from all over Africa to discuss this year's main topic, which is silencing the guns. Issues such as meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and of course security were top on the agenda. Now, joining me now to look at these issues is the Practice Lead, Sub-Saharan Africa for Frontier Strategy Group, DOCA Frontier, William Atwell. Good afternoon, Mr.
Hi,
Atwell.
thanks for having me on the show.
You're welcome. Well, this year's AU Summit theme is silencing the guns, which tends towards security, of course, achieving a peaceful and secure Africa. How apt is this conversation? How can African governments make peace a reality for African people for economic development?
It's a very apt theme for the recent heads of state summit at the AU. Certainly, we've seen an uptick in terms of some of the destabilizing forces in several sub-Saharan African sub-regions. So, of course, in the Sahel, with Boko Haram, of course, continuing to be a threat there. A really significant uptick in recent months in Burkina Faso, posing a real threat to stability there and, of course, the wider region. Then, of course, continuing challenges in the Horn and even along East Africa, along the coast, really threatening those economies, threatening investment sentiment, and threatening the prospects for business. So certainly very apt. In terms of the second part of your question around how should African countries and governments be responding to this, I think really developing a coordinated approach to financing counter-terrorism and counterinsurgency activities is going to be key. We know that Western countries who've been certainly underpinning some of the efforts against insurgencies in recent years are reconsidering some of their funding. You know, we know the US has been reconsidering its involvement in the Sahel, for instance. So I think African governments coming together and developing a coordinated response is going to be really key.
All right, now this summit is coming at a time when climate change is wreaking havoc, particularly on food supplies. The droughts of Southern Africa and the low-cost invasion of Eastern Africa continues to play into food security, along with the floods in Mozambique in 2019 following the cyclone. Now, what impact will these have on African economies and, of course, businesses, and what should the African government be doing at this time?
Well, the immediate impact, of course, is on the agricultural sector and farmers themselves, where we would expect certainly crop production and output generally for Q1 at least to be somewhat subdued. I think the secondary impacts are really going to be felt more in the price environment, with inflation, particularly in those countries affected by droughts, and also now, of course, the locust infestation, which I see now has spread to Uganda as well, really contributing to much higher food price inflation, which, of course, hits consumers at the end of the day.
The African Development Bank is launching its African Economic Outlook at this summit, which has the theme Developing Africa's Workforce of the Future. Now, this aligns with the bank's high-five priority area of improving the quality of life for the people of Africa. Give us an insight of what the report is pushing for, particularly as inequality continues to rise on the continent.
That's a really key theme here. Of course, growth is important. The outlook stated in the reports around 3.9% GDP growth for 2020. We think it'll probably be a bit lower than that, closer to 3.1%, 3.2% or thereabouts. So certainly continuing to drive growth is important, but as you correctly pointed out, the focus on being inclusive, creating jobs. I think African governments that are creating incentives for manufacturing business in particular, that's going to be really important for stimulating some of that investment in job-creating industries. So that should really continue to be a focus going forward.
Now, but do you think African governments are doing enough to close the inequality gap?
Most certainly not. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of creating more transparency in the tax systems, ensuring that wealthy individuals don't get away with not paying their fair share, and of course making sure companies pay their fair share as well. But of course that involves a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of making sure tax systems are robust, that reporting is clear-cut, and that, of course, tax systems operate efficiently themselves. So there's still a lot of work to be done on the administrative side, and hopefully in the coming years we'll start to see a bit more progress on that front.
All right, now South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is taking up the AU chair this time. What should be his priority?
So he's already been stating some of his priorities. I think the theme around stability and security is going to be continue to be a theme throughout his chairmanship of the AU. As we go forward, I know he's also keen to push the question of cross-border infrastructure and integration using infrastructure projects. We know, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is signed by the majority of African countries now, but of course, investing in those cross-border infrastructure links are going to be key for that trade to actually happen at scale. So I know he's mentioned taking forward further projects like the Inga 3 dam projects, the Lesotho Highlands water projects, the next phases of that, and other cross-border initiatives. So I think that's going to be a real key theme for him. And I know he's keen to host an infrastructure financing summit in South Africa in the near future.
All right, thank you, Williams, for sharing your thoughts with us. William Artwell is the practice lead Sub-Saharan Africa for Frontier Strategy Group, DACA Frontier.